Whitestone, Queens, New York City, May 17th, 1990. Whitestone is a largely middle to upper middle class section of northern Queens. However, in some subsections of Whitestone, like the community of Malba, the streets are lined with multi-million-dollar homes, some sitting on waterfront property, with beautiful views of the East River. It's an area with low crime and an overall great place to grow up. Because of its beautiful homes and quiet streets away from the hustle and bustle of the more urbanized sections of New York City, Whitestone has always been a haven for well-to-do families, including those connected to organized crime in New York City. Some of the most powerful mobsters who have called Whitestone home include Tommy Lucchese, who lived at 106 Parsons Boulevard in the Malba section of Whitestone, Anthony Tony Ducks Carallo, who had lived at two different residences during his time in the community, and Carmine Tremonti. All three of these men had at one time served as bosses of the Lucchese crime family. On May 17, 1990, police would respond to a call at the Crider Point waterfront houses in Whitestone, Queens. What they would discover would shock them. For a moment in time, Whitestone, Queens didn't feel so safe. In June of 1989, a man would get a late-night knock on his door at his home in Whitestone, Queens. The man knocking was a fellow coworker who would state that he was just ran off the road and dragged out of his car. He would explain to his coworker that they told him to pass a message to him. The message was clear. Step down from your position as a union official, or your days on earth are numbered. The frightened, shaken man would ask, "Who the hell is behind this?" His coworker replied, "Gaspipe." The man who answered the door to his frantic friend that night was James Bishop, a decorated Korean War veteran who at that time had been the Secretary-Treasurer of the International Brotherhood of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council Number 9, one of the most powerful unions in all of the city. And just a fun fact, a union that my own father had been a part of for almost 30 years. As a child, my father would make me accompany him to DC-9 Union Hall meetings. Every once in a while, I'd have to sit there and listen to the boring crap spit out by the union officials. In the mid-90s, I would accompany my father to a rally in Manhattan, which almost became a riot as irate union workers clogged the streets and attempted to flip over cars. I still wonder to this day why the hell my dad took me to this thing as a little kid. But I digress. James Bishop had also been on the executive board of the City Central Labor Council and president of the Metal Trades District Council. If that wasn't enough, James Bishop had also been a Democratic district leader in his hometown of Whitestone, and a two-time chairman of New York City's Labor Day Parade. When it came to powerful union men with political connections, James Bishop was surely a standout in New York City. However, it would be his connections to the dark underworld of organized crime that would boost his career and ultimately catch up to him. In the mid-1970s, when Bishop took his seat at the District Council 9 Painters Union, he had already formed an affiliation with the Lucchese crime family, often meeting at the 19th Hole Bar in Bensonhurst, where he would sit with Capo and future consigliere Christopher Christie Ticfernari. They would develop bid rigging schemes and other ways to win contracts for the union in New York City. According to Alphonse Little Al Diarco, future Lucchese acting boss and government witness, it would be these schemes that would lay some of the blueprints for the racketeers involved in the Windows case, which the government brought against the mob in 1990. The Windows case, according to the government, said that the mob, as far back as 1978, were fixing bids in order to win contracts from New York City's housing authority. The mob would install windows on city property and receive kickbacks which reportedly totaled to over $150 million. It would be in 1978 that the union board would accuse James Bishop of mismanaging funds. In turn, they would place a man by the name of James Wolford to serve as a trustee in order to look over James Bishop. However, Bishop had other plans for James Wolford. Bishop would meet with Lucchese mobster Big P. Chiodo, towering whale of a man, clocking in at 350 pounds. A man who knew how to make a buck and knew how to break people down. Bishop would tell Kyoto that he wanted trustee James Wilford to be kicked out of his position. Kyoto would report back to Christy Tick, who would tell him to do what was necessary to berid the Union of Wilford. Kyoto would then assemble a couple of guys and make an early morning trip to the Union headquarters at West 14th Street. Inside, they would ambush Wilford and beat him with metal pipes. "You're going to step down from your position, and you're going to leave New York, or else this won't be the last time you see us." Wilford would spend months in the hospital and would leave New York in his position as a trustee. James Bishop got his way, but forged himself a dangerous new path. It would be going forward that Bishop would continue to rise and gain more power in New York City. He would soon help the Lucchese's install this man, Corrado Dino Marino. Corrado Marino would get a cushy union position and be responsible for handling union payoffs to the Lucchese crime family. Over the next decade, Bishop would attain more positions of power within New York City. As mentioned earlier, Bishop would get on the executive board of the city's Central Labor Council and become president of the Metal Trades District Council. By 1988, Bishop was vying for a vice president position at District Council 9, and was of course hoping for the backing of the Lucchese crime family, a family who he had been affiliated with for over a decade at this point. However, for the past couple of years, he had been dealing with a new regime within the Lucchese family. With his old buddy Christy Tick Fernari sent to prison in 1986, along with boss Tony Dux Corallo and numerous other mobsters during the commission trials, Vic Musso and Anthony Gaspipe Casso would take over the family, and having James Bishop as the DC-9 vice president was not in the cards. In fact, getting rid of much of the old mobsters and affiliates of the Lucchese crime family would become the MO of these new leaders. At the time Bishop was vying for a vice president position, Anthony Casso expressed his desire to fill the spot with one of his own men, a man by the name of Edward Capaldo, who at that time was the head of Painters Union Local 1486 on Long Island. Big P. Kyoto would meet with Bishop and tell him that the vice president position would not be in the future plans. But in actuality, James Bishop's involvement in the unions as a whole was about to cease completely. Bishop would start receiving threats to step down, and it would be then when his cohort would knock on his door after midnight, telling him that he just got ran off the road and threatened by a group of men who demanded he pass a message to Bishop, a message stating that him and his grandkids would all be in the line of fire if he didn't resign. Bishop would resign a couple days later, but would soon start speaking to authorities about what was going on with organized crime's infiltration into the New York City unions. Bishop had also been in contact with the New York Daily News and was passing them information about union activity and threats he had received, though he was obviously not named at the time. Anthony Gaspipe Casso would soon find out that Bishop was cooperating when two men he referred to as his crystal ball would notify him. That crystal ball being Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, two NYPD detectives turned hitmen for the Lucchese crime family. These two criminal NYPD detectives would take part in hits for Gaspipe, as well as pass intel to Gaspipe, which would lead to multiple hits. In early 1990, Al Diarco, P. Kyoto, Anthony Casso, and other mobsters would meet above a luncheonette on Flatlands Ave in Utica. According to Diarco, Casso would produce a list of all painting contractors and those he knew were cooperators, James Bishop being one of them. Casso would go on a tirade, which Al Diarco would describe as similar to an emperor watching his kingdom spiral out of control. "Fuck James Bishop!" Casso would scream. He would soon send out P. Kyoto to surveil James Bishop in his hometown of Whitestone, Queens, and figure out the best place to berid the world of James Bishop. He would discover that Bishop spent time not only at his home in Whitestone, but at his girlfriend's condo at the Crider Point Houses, also in Whitestone. This spot would prove to be the best location, according to Kyoto. Kyoto would also go on to claim that Casso himself asked him to give him a personal tour of the area where the hit was going to take place. On the morning of Thursday, May 17th, 1990, Lucchese mobsters George Cipolla and George Conti would make their way into Whitestone, Queens, in a stolen car. Trailing behind them, in his Jeep, would be Big Frank Lastarino, another Lucchese mobster prone to extreme violence. At around 11 a.m., after sitting on the location for a while, they would spot Bishop at the Crider Point parking lot, standing beside his Lincoln Town Car. Cipolla would emerge and pump 10 shots into Bishop. Bishop would hop in his car and be able to put it in drive. However, in seconds, he would crash into a fence, and that would be the end for James Bishop. The powerful Union and Democratic district leader, who made a pact with the Lucchese crime family in the 1970s, lost his life. Like so many before him, who rolled the dice and bet on the seedy underworld of organized crime. In the coming months, Anthony Casso, Vic Musso, and other Lucchese mobsters like George Cipolla would become fugitives. Little Al DiArco, who would serve as acting boss, would ultimately turn informant, as well as others like Big P. Chiodo, a man who the crazed Gaspipe tried to take out when he was shot multiple times at a Staten Island gas station. If that wasn't enough, they would even try to rub out Big P. Chiodo's sister, Patricia Capozzalo, after Chiodo would turn informant. As many of you know, Anthony Gaspipe Casso would also turn informant. However, his deal would ultimately get ripped up and thrown out in the trash, leaving Casso to rot in prison, where he would die in 2020. Lucchese boss Vic Musso still sits in prison today. And as far as those that went to take out Bishop on that morning of May 17, 1990, all three are free men today, after taking plea deals in the mid-90s. Cipolla and Conti would both serve close to 20 years, and Lastarina would serve 14. All are said to have been involved in numerous murders during Musso and Casso's bloody reign. In 2006, a year after Mafia cops Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa were outed and indicted for their roles in numerous hits for Anthony Casso and the Lucchese's, the family of James Bishop would file a lawsuit against New York City and the NYPD due to the exploits of Ippolito and Caracappa. This case would drag on for many years, but in August of 2015, it would finally come to an end. The last lawsuits against the city would be settled, and the Bishop family, along with 7 other families, would successfully sue the NYPD and New York City for $18.4 million. The family would finally get some compensation for the loss of their loved one, which was aided by 2 crooked NYPD detectives, who were tasked with upholding the law, but instead turned executioners for the mob. In closing, I hope you enjoyed this tale, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Also, hit that like button. If you would like to donate to my channel, there's a Cash App in my About section, which I'll put up now. There's also other ways you can give by giving a super thanks, which is located up at the top where you would thumbs up the video. And there's also many other ways you can help by simply telling people about my channel and spreading the gospel of New York City Crime Spot. Thank you so much for joining me.